Traditional media continues its downward spiral. I'm Marco Perry. Welcome to the Perry Platform. The numbers don't look good for traditional media, or legacy media, or however you want to call it. That includes newspaper organizations and local TV news networks, including the likes of the New York Post, CNN, and in Canada, CB24, the Toronto Star. All of them are facing an existential crisis. To me, this was both predictable and yet still a tragedy. I'll get into why it's a bad thing in a second, but first I want to talk about how we got here. These were once all very respected names in media. There wasn't as prevalent of a political bias. People trusted these sources. And that there is our first issue. The trust in traditional media has gone by the wayside. People find these outlets to be heavily biased, and individuals are seeing that the truth resides elsewhere. So, people are simply not reading or looking to these sources for info anymore. There is no shortage of examples I could give you. Some that come to mind were the hypocrisy that was revealed during the pandemic and a seeming drive to more radical leftist ideologies. And at the same time, given the polarization, they're also unopen to airing different viewpoints. Many of these media outlets will say they prioritize things like diversity, but when it comes to diversity of opinions, there is no room for that. They hold certain tenets to be sacred, almost like a religion, and that's been off-putting to many viewers. Second, you have a corrupt business model. Many of these traditional media outlets relied heavily on advertising. Now, that comes with issues because it makes you beholden to your advertisers. When large pharmaceutical companies are footing your payroll, there are going to be certain things that you can and cannot talk about. There are going to be certain ads that you can and cannot run. We see the same issue too with non-traditional media outlets, including podcasts. There are some shows that are very beholden to their advertisers, and there are some shows, like Sam Harris's Making Sense, where he says whatever he wants because he's funded by his audience, which is a far better model. And speaking about that, we do have our third factor that led to the demise of traditional media, which is modern competition. Many people have found solace in the likes of Joe Rogan, Sam Harris, Jordan Peterson, or whoever your favorite podcaster is. They're seeing that these individuals are more humble, more open to debate, and they don't purport to know everything. They also don't have the same air of sanctimony that many in the media had. It's to the point now where I believe one of the biggest shows in the news category that's been around, CNN, is only accumulating something like 40,000 views on some of their shows, while the Joe Rogan podcast can accumulate millions in a day. Our attention has shifted. Part of me does feel like the media industry needed this as a wake-up call, but it's unfortunate as I don't see anything changing. Truly, the ones who are going to pay the price are us, the citizenry, because no matter how good you think the Joe Rogan podcast is, it's very clear that he is not a professional journalist. Now that term has become tainted as of late. We have journalists that have strayed very far from their mandate of objective truth, of asking tough questions to power, of being unbiased, of simply trying to expose the realities of the world to their audience. That job description hasn't applied to that role for quite some time, with a few notable exceptions, but many of those exceptions have gone to Substack to create their own articles and newspapers because traditional media wasn't having it with their line of thinking. With the exodus of real journalists from journalism, you're left with a cesspool of individuals who are caught up in their own bias and who are pushing agendas. That's very off-putting to a population that is educated. If you expect the likes of Joe Rogan and independent Substacks to fill the void of a fully funded journalistic team that's doing their job as they should, well, you're in for a letdown. The bedrock truth is we need professionals and institutions to do their job. They were corrupted by ideology and agenda pushing, but their destruction is a bad thing for us. We shouldn't be cheering it on. In fact, we should be looking for ways to rebuild these organizations. Podcasters are great within their niche and their sphere of influence, but they're not going to be traveling around following the Prime Minister, for example, and being in the press gallery to ask challenging questions and to understand evasion tactics and media relation pitches. There is formal training and education that comes with that prepares you for it. I feel that if we're left to our own devices here and cast into the world of Substack and podcasts, we're going to become easier to influence, easier to confuse, easier to pit against each other. And I'm already seeing that. For example, viewers of the Young Turks have nothing in common with viewers of the Jordan Peterson podcast, as one example. And there's very little that those two groups are doing to bridge the gap and communicate. It's almost as if they're reading from different choir sheets. They have very different facts that are going through their minds. At least with traditional media, when it was doing its job properly, people were left with a standard. People were given a base ground of truth, and from there we'd be able to debate and figure out what's really going on. When your facts don't align, and I say facts there with quotations because there shouldn't be two sets of them. There should be one. That's going to create a lot of hysteria. There's going to be claims that are made that don't make any sense to the other party, and there's going to be no foundation for cooperation. As we look to the future, there are a couple things that obviously have to change in the traditional media landscape for them to have a chance at regaining confidence. First, we have to do away with their current show models. To only have 30 seconds or 2 minutes to discuss complicated topics is not going to work anymore. This is where podcasts get it right. You do need a couple hours to dive into things and to push past general platitudes. Get your politicians on a 3-hour discussion so you can press into their thinking and into their policies. If I have Trudeau on a TV show and I only have 30 seconds with him, or 2 minutes, it's very easy for him to dance around the topic, run out the clock, and then move on. But if it's just me and him with 2 microphones, and I can continue to follow up and press for 3 hours, we're going to get a more healthy discussion that actually talks about real things, not just sayings and slogans as comms team fed to him. Our population is highly educated, and that's what we want. We have a desire for a meaningful conversation, not just snippets. The next thing we have to look at is the business model. I really believe we have to break away from the advertiser-based revenue stream. That comes with so many inherent biases and tiptoeing around issues that prohibits journalists and media outlets from doing their job as they should. And finally, to really earn back the trust of the public, we have to do away with media bias. Canada is a very diverse country, and we have many diverse viewpoints. We have conservatives, we have liberals, we have libertarians, and we have everything under the sun here. If people feel like you are far too biased and you're pushing an agenda, and your goal is not to tell the truth, but instead to indoctrinate, to subtly or overtly push a frame of thinking upon the population, that's going to be rejected right away. Journalists have to get back to what they were used to doing and what brought them success in the first place, which is finding out what's really going on and laying a foundation of bedrock truth for the population to grapple with. And from there, you can have your opinion pieces and debates, but please, let's drop the interpretation. We have to get back to basics here. Ask yourself when's the last time that you've read a full newspaper or watched an entire news broadcast. It's probably been quite some time, and that's probably true for your peers as well. But when's the last time you've read an independent article or listened to a podcast or something like that? Probably sometime this week you've done that, much more recently than a traditional media piece. Then you can ask yourself why that is. Are these more modern means of communication more entertaining? Well, if that's the case, there's nothing that's stopping traditional media from adopting those techniques. Is it because you've been fed up with the spin and the bias? Well, once again, there's nothing stopping traditional media from abandoning that and getting back on track. The point I'm making is many of these issues are resolvable. All it's going to take is leadership with the backbone and the vision to make it happen, to make these changes, to adapt to the current times, to be honest about their issues, and to change. My only hope is that this transformation can happen before it's too late. I really fear for the future if we're left to balkanize and scatter, as we are now, in the land of independent media, where professional journalistic standards are not the norm, and we forget about what it means to hold things like objective fact as a reality. Now with that, it does bring us to the end of our conversation for today. If you enjoyed the content, be sure to leave a review and share. They'll help us grow. And you can find me online at perryplatform.org and on social media at perryplatform. Thanks for joining me, and I'll see you soon.